The rain had been falling since sundown. Not the gentle, rhythmic kind that lulls you to sleep, but the furious, punishing kind that turns highways into rivers and headlights into blurs. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and leaned forward, as if a few inches closer to the windshield might give me better visibility through the curtain of water. It didn't. It was nearly 20 past midnight. I was exhausted in the bone-deep way that only comes from a 16-hour workday, the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes and pulls at the corners of your mouth. But I had been driving this stretch of highway for 5 years. I knew every curve, every merge, every pothole the city never bothered to fix. I was almost home. That was the last thought I remember having. The headlights appeared from nowhere. Wrong lane, wrong side, impossibly close. A truck, enormous and indifferent, barreling through the storm as though physics were a suggestion. I wrenched the wheel. My tires screamed against the slick asphalt. The world tilted sideways. Then came the sound, not a crash so much as a detonation, metal folding against metal, glass exploding inward like 1,000 tiny knives, and then, beneath everything, a silence so absolute it felt like the universe had pressed a hand over my mouth. Then darkness. Clean, total, merciful darkness. The first thing I was aware of was the smell. Antiseptic. Bleach. The chemical approximation of cleanliness. My eyelids were impossibly heavy, as though someone had stitched them shut. When I finally forced them open, the overhead fluorescent light burned white and merciless, and I shut them again immediately, groaning. "Take your time," said a voice. I tried again, slower. The room assembled itself in pieces. Pale blue curtains, the soft insistence of a heart monitor, and force snaking from the back of my hand, a bag of clear fluid swaying gently above me. A man in a white coat sat in a chair beside the bed, a tablet resting in his lap. He was perhaps 50, silver at his temples, with a kind of unhurried presence that either means a person is very calm or has seen so much suffering that nothing rushes them anymore. "You're in St. Meridian Hospital," he said. "You've been in surgery. You've been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. 18 hours. I processed that slowly, like reading a sentence in a language I was still learning. "The accident," I started. "A truck crossed the median. You took the full impact on the driver's side." His voice was steady, factual. 3 broken ribs. A fractured collarbone. Lacerations across your left arm and shoulder. And a bleed in your abdomen that required emergency surgery. He paused. "You're fortunate, Ms. Vaughn. A few centimeters difference, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." I absorbed that in silence. Fortunate. I had never particularly felt like a fortunate person, but I supposed survival qualified. "My phone," I said. "Was it recovered?" "Destroyed in the accident, I'm afraid." He watched me carefully. "But your emergency contacts were reached." Another pause, deliberate this time, waited. "Your parents were contacted approximately 40 minutes after you arrived." Something tightened in my chest. Not hope, exactly. I had excised hope from the equation where my parents were concerned years ago. More like the ghost of hope, the muscle memory of wanting. "And?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, carefully and quietly, "Your mother said they were at your sister's birthday celebration. She said, and I want you to know that I am only repeating what was communicated to us," she said. "If she doesn't make it, let us know afterward." The heart monitor beeped. The 4 dripped. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. "If she doesn't make it, let us know afterward." I stared at the ceiling. I did not cry. I had stopped crying over my parents somewhere around the age of 14, the night of my first school recital, when I had sat in a blue velvet dress in the second row and searched the auditorium for their faces right up until the lights dimmed. They hadn't come. Lily had a dance competition that weekend. Lily always had something. "Ms. Vaughn." The doctor leaned forward slightly. His eyes were kind, genuinely kind, not the practiced clinical variety. I've worked in this hospital for 23 years. I've made thousands of calls to families in crisis. In my experience, the way people respond to those calls tells you almost everything about them. He studied me. I suspect they don't know very much about who you've become. It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. They never wanted to know, I said. He nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he'd already understood. Then, so quietly it was almost to himself, he added, "That's a great tragedy for them." And for the first time in the 18 hours since my life had nearly ended, something moved in my chest. Not grief, not bitterness, something quieter and stranger, something almost like peace. Let me tell you about Lily. Lily Vaughn was the kind of beautiful that made rooms go quiet. Not just physically, though she was striking, dark eyes, easy smile, the natural grace of someone who had never doubted her right to take up space, but in the way she moved through the world as though it had been specifically arranged for her arrival. People gravitated toward her without understanding why. My parents most of all. From the time I was old enough to notice, I understood the architecture of our household. Lily was the sun. Everything orbited her, the dinner conversations, the weekend plans, the emotional weather of the family. When Lily was happy, the house was bright. When Lily was struggling, the household mobilized. When Lily succeeded, which she did often and loudly, my parents' pride was something almost religious in its intensity. I was the shadow, not the dark, threatening kind, just the absence of light that exists wherever light does not reach. I was 2 years older than Lily. I had better grades. I read more. I worked harder and asked for less. I learned to move quietly through rooms, to anticipate what I needed and provide it for myself rather than asking and being forgotten. I made my own doctor's appointments at 13. I packed my own lunches. I reminded myself of my own birthday. "You're so self-sufficient," my mother used to say, with a smile that I now recognize as relief rather than admiration. She doesn't need us. It was easier that way for everyone, or so they told themselves. The worst year was when I was 16. I had been accepted into an advanced academic program at a university 2 hours away, a summer program for gifted students in economics and mathematics. It was competitive. It was prestigious. I had worked for 3 months on the application, reading every paper the program directors had published, crafting each essay with a kind of meticulous care that other girls my age reserved for love letters. I got in. I was one of 40 students selected from 4,000 applicants. I told my parents at dinner. My mother was cutting Lily's birthday cake, Lily's 16th birthday, a 3-tiered white chocolate confection with her name written in gold calligraphy. My father was filming the candle moment on his phone. "That's nice, sweetheart," my mother said, not looking up. "Can you pass the dessert plates?" That was it. "That's nice, sweetheart." 3 days later, Lily mentioned she wanted new dance shoes, and my father drove 40 minutes to a specialty studio to find the exact pair she'd pointed to in a magazine. I stopped expecting things after that. Expectations were a luxury I couldn't afford. I left home the morning after my 18th birthday. Not dramatically, not with slamming doors or tearful accusations. I simply packed 2 suitcases, transferred the small amount of money I had saved from 3 years of weekend jobs, and called a car. My father was in his study. My mother was helping Lily get ready for a pageant. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm going. I'll be fine. Don't worry. Don't worry." I had written it more for myself than for them. A reminder that I was someone worth not worrying about. Someone who would be fine. For a long time, I told myself they hadn't noticed when I left. Eventually, I admitted they probably hadn't. What I built over the next 10 years, I built alone. The first 2 years were brutal in the way that only complete freedom can be brutal. Freedom and poverty look remarkably similar from the inside. I worked 3 jobs while completing my undergraduate degree, sleeping in 4-hour intervals, surviving on coffee and ambition and a quiet, white-hot anger that I had learned to channel into productivity rather than destruction. I graduated summa cum laude with degrees in economics and law, having missed exactly 1 class in 4 years because I had the flu and physically could not stand. Then a master's degree. Then a position at a consulting firm, where I worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that no one was going to open a door for me, which meant I needed to build my own doors. I met Marcus Chen in my 3rd year at the firm, a venture capitalist with a reputation for finding overlooked opportunities. He called me into his office one afternoon and pushed a manila folder across his desk. Inside were projections for a non-profit healthcare access initiative I had developed on evenings and weekends, a passion project I had mentioned once, in passing, in a strategy meeting. "This is exceptional work," he said. 3 words. They shouldn't have meant as much as they did. But I was 24 years old and no one had ever said those words to me about anything I'd created, and I had to look out the window for a moment before I could respond. That meeting changed the direction of my life. By 27, I had co-founded the Vaughn Foundation with seed funding from Marcus and 3 other investors who recognized what I had known for years, that the gaps in emergency medical care for uninsured and underinsured patients were not only morally unconscionable but were also creating enormous downstream costs for the entire healthcare system. The foundation funded trauma centers in underserved communities, provided emergency surgery scholarships for patients who couldn't afford life-saving procedures, and established a scholarship program that had put 342 first-generation students through university. I was not famous in the conventional sense. I didn't seek coverage or profiles. I wore my success quietly, the way you wear something precious, close to the skin and not for display. My parents had no idea. I had not spoken to them in 7 years. I had not been invited to family gatherings. I had not been included in group texts. When my father's retirement celebration had been held 2 years prior, I had learned about it the following week from an old neighbor who sent a Facebook post. I had looked at the photos, my parents beaming, Lily at the center of every frame, a celebration full of people who loved each other, and I had felt nothing more acute than the mild ache of an old scar. They had built a life that didn't include me. I had built a life that didn't need them. I was on day 4 of my recovery when they came. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's voice in the corridor, tight with a particular strain of someone performing concern for an audience. Then the door opened, and there they were, older than I remembered. My mother's hair had gone fully silver. She'd styled it well, as she always did. My father stood slightly behind her, a habit I recognized as his default posture in uncomfortable situations, present but positioned for retreat. My mother carried flowers. Lilies, of all things, white, store-bought, still bearing the discount sticker from the hospital gift shop. Isabella. She crossed the room and leaned down for a kiss that landed somewhere near my temple. Her perfume was the same as it had always been. Something about that undid me for a moment, the way scent bypasses every defense the mind constructs. I breathed through it. "You look better than we expected," my father offered from the doorway. "Than you expected," I repeated mildly. "Considering you were told I might not survive." The silence that followed was the specific silence of people who have been caught. My mother set the lilies on the bedside table. We didn't fully understand the severity. The hospital was unclear. "The doctor told you it was an emergency surgery." My voice was calm. I had been rehearsing this conversation in some form or another for 4 days, lying in this bed with nothing but time and clarity. "He told you there was a chance I wouldn't make it. You told him to call you afterward." My father opened his mouth. "I'm not angry," I said, before he could offer whatever deflection he'd prepared. And the remarkable thing was that it was true. The anger had burned itself out years ago, replaced by something cleaner and colder. Understanding. I stopped being angry a long time ago. I'm telling you what happened because I think we should all be operating on facts rather than comfortable revision. My mother sat down in the chair beside the bed. She seemed suddenly older, as though she had aged 10 years in the crossing of the room. We made a terrible mistake, she said softly. You made a consistent choice, I replied. That night was simply the most visible version of it. Before she could respond, the door opened. Dr. Harlan entered, followed by a woman I recognized as Eleanor Marsh, the hospital's chief administrator, and a young associate in a dark suit carrying a tablet. Eleanor had the practiced composure of someone who has spent decades managing large institutions, but there was something slightly careful in the way she looked at me, a deference that my parents clearly noticed. Ms. Vaughn, Eleanor said warmly. I'm sorry to interrupt. We just need your signature on the trauma wing documents before the board meeting tomorrow. My mother turned. The trauma wing? The Vaughn Foundation's endowment, Eleanor said, glancing between us with a confused expression of someone walking in on the middle of a private conversation. The new pediatric trauma wing. Ms. Vaughn's foundation has been our single largest donor for 4 consecutive years. She looked at me, reading my expression, and something shifted in her manner. She spoke more carefully now. Your daughter's foundation has funded over 200 emergency surgeries at this hospital alone. The room went very still. My father stared at me. My mother had stopped breathing. Her foundation, my mother repeated. The Vaughn Foundation, I confirmed. I started it 9 years ago. The silence stretched out, dense and full of everything that had never been said. I watched their faces move through a rapid series of expressions. Shock, recalculation, something that looked almost like shame, and beneath that, something else. Something I recognized, having spent a lifetime trying to inspire it, and having long since stopped needing to. Pride. Painfully belated, entirely uninvited, and far too late. I signed the documents while they watched. Eleanor and the associate excused themselves with the tact of professionals who understand when they've stumbled into a family reckoning. Dr. Harlan lingered a moment at the door, catching my eye with a small, knowing nod of someone who had understood who I was long before my parents had. Then the door closed, and we were alone. The conversation that followed was quiet and devastating in the specific way that honest conversations about a lifetime of failure tend to be. My mother cried. My father paced. I let them cycle through it, the apologies and explanations and anguished reframings of the past, without interrupting. Not because I was being cruel, but because I understood that they needed to say it, to hear themselves say it, more than I needed to hear it. When they had finished, I asked, "Why did you really come?" The question changed the air in the room. My father stopped pacing. My mother looked up. I waited. "It's Lily," my father said at last. I had not expected that. Or perhaps I had, somewhere in the back of my mind where I kept the things I didn't want to examine too closely. Her company has been under investigation, my mother said. For some months now. Fraud, financial misrepresentation, she misled investors. She pressed her lips together, and I could see the effort it took to say the next part plainly. She could go to prison. I held their gaze. How much does she need? The legal fees alone are. How much? Possibly $2 million over the course of the defense. More if it goes to trial. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, the hospital went on being a hospital. Monitors beeping, trolleys rolling, someone being saved, someone not being saved. Let me understand this, I said carefully. You missed my emergency surgery to attend her birthday party. You raised her as the irreplaceable one, the golden child, while I was the obligation. You have not spoken to me in 7 years, have not attended a single event in my adult life, have made no effort to know who I became after I left your home. I paused. And now you have come to the hospital where I am recovering from nearly dying to ask me to spend $2 million defending her from the consequences of her own choices. Neither of them spoke. I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, I said, because I want to be fair. My mother's voice was barely a sound. Isabella. I'm not finished. Not harshly. Just clearly. I want to be fair, because I think fairness matters, even when people haven't been fair to you. Especially then. Another silence. Then my father, very quietly, "We know what we're asking. We know how it sounds." "Do you?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was 63 years old and sitting in a chair in the hospital room of the daughter he had never seen, and he looked like a man who had just discovered the full cost of every shortcut he had taken. "I hope you do, because I want you to carry it with you clearly, not as guilt, which is just self-pity in a different costume, but as understanding, as the actual knowledge of what you chose and what it cost." My mother was crying again, silently. I let it settle. Then I spoke. "I won't pay her legal fees. Not because I can't, and not because I want to see her suffer, but because I won't be the mechanism by which someone evades accountability for deliberately harming other people." I let that sit. Lily made choices that hurt investors, employees, people who trusted her. That's not something I will buy her way out of. My father nodded slowly, heavily. "However," I continued, "I will fund the retainer for a qualified defense attorney. Not a fixer. Not someone who will look for procedural exits. Someone who will ensure she gets a fair trial, which is what every person deserves, regardless of what they've done." I looked at them steadily. "I'm not doing it for Lily. I'm doing it because justice, real justice, requires that everyone is properly represented. That's what my foundation is built on. I won't compromise it even for this." My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. "You should also know," I said, softer now, "that I am not doing it to earn your gratitude. I don't want your gratitude. I don't need your approval. I haven't needed it for years. I'm doing it because the woman I chose to become makes decisions based on values, not on wounds. And I've worked too hard to become her to abandon her now." They left an hour later. No dramatic reconciliation. No tearful embraces. My mother paused at the door and looked back at me for a long time, her hand resting on the frame, as if she were trying to memorize something. I didn't look away. Eventually she nodded, a small motion, barely visible, and was gone. My father turned in the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said. Just that. Not the full sentence, not the complete thought, just the words, offered plainly, without ornamentation. "I know," I said. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. The two are not the same thing, and in my experience, the conflation of them is what causes people to mistake emotional performance for actual change. When the door clicked shut, I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about the girl who had sat in a blue velvet dress in the second row, searching the auditorium. I thought about the 18-year-old who had left a note on a kitchen counter and dragged 2 suitcases toward a future that was entirely her own responsibility. I thought about the sleepless nights, the 3 jobs, the way hunger sharpens focus in a way that comfort never quite can. I thought about Marcus Chen sliding a folder across a desk and saying this is exceptional work. I thought about the 217 people who were alive today because the Vaughn Foundation had paid for their surgeries. I thought about all the ways I had been failed, and all the ways I had refused to let those failures define the ceiling of my life. There was grief in the accounting. I would not pretend otherwise. There is always grief in the recognition of what was withheld from you. But there was also, and I felt this fully, without qualification, an immense and uncomplicated gratitude for the woman I had become without their help. She was mine. Every part of her, the tenacity, the discipline, the compassion that had somehow survived abandonment intact, was mine. They could not take credit for a single element of her. And that, I realized, was not a wound. It was the most complete freedom I had ever known. Epilogue. The world knows your name. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in the atrium of St. Meridian Hospital's newly opened Vaughn Pediatric Trauma Wing. The room was full. Doctors, donors, patients who had become advocates, journalists, city officials. Cameras. Lights. The particular energy of a room full of people who have gathered for something they believe in. I had been asked to give remarks. I stood at the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, and for a moment I thought of the girl who had waited for applause that never came, who had learned to need only her own. She felt very far away. Not gone. I carry her, I will always carry her, but no longer in charge of everything. I started the Vaughn Foundation, I said, because I understood from a young age that survival is not the same as living, and that the difference between the two is often a matter of whether someone is willing to help you when you need it most. I paused. This wing is for the people who didn't have anyone, who were alone in their emergency, who needed someone to say, "Your life matters enough to fight for." I paused, looked down at my notes, though I didn't need them. It always did. After the ceremony, Dr. Harlan found me near the window, watching the city. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I considered the question honestly. "Like I survived something larger than a car accident," I said. He smiled. "You did." He looked out at the city with me. "Your parents. Any update?" "Lily's case settled last month. She'll serve 18 months, reduced for cooperation." I watched a taxi navigate a wet intersection below. My mother called me last week. We spoke for 11 minutes. It was awkward and strange, and nothing was resolved. I thought about it. But she called. "Is that enough?" I was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I'm not in a hurry. I have time." That, perhaps, was the most radical thing I had gained from all of it. Time felt different now. Less urgent, less desperate. I was no longer running from something. I was, for the first time in my life, simply moving forward. The city sparkled below us, indifferent and vast, and full of people building lives from whatever materials they'd been given. My name was Isabella Vaughn. I had been the daughter they forgot. I had become the woman they could not ignore. And more importantly, far more importantly, I had become exactly who I wanted to be. That was mine. It had always been mine. And no one could take it from me now.